Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to just cover how to do this particular deliverable from assignment 3, the axonometric inversion, which says here ghosted mixed media depicting spaces as solid, cast as void. In other words, what we want to do here is attempt to draw in axonometric our cast and represent only the material that we used to make those voids when we were casting. So what I've done, and I'll show you two techniques of how to do this. What I've done is I've taken the sandcast model and drawing, and I've traced each elevation. This is going to be useful for several of our, or for both of our axonometrics. So I've traced the front and the back of the skinny end and the top. And now what I'm going to try and do is basically reconstruct it three-dimensionally. So if I take each of these kind of elevations, and I'm going to just lock the picture layer. Make sure I grab everything. Okay. I'll make a copy of it. So just use the command copy, bring it over here. Okay. And then what I want to do is kind of rotate them up. I'm just going to do this with the gumball really quick. I'm just holding shift to rotate 90 degrees. Do these both at the same time. Okay. And then I'm going to kind of put it back together one frame at a time. Rotate that 180, snap it into place. This elevation must be on that end, all right. So in this case, what I'm going to demonstrate is kind of a technique for drawing kind of like live sections through the volume. Because the sandcast ones are going to be, or can be pretty complex, what we want to do is, rather than try and model the complexity of that surface, in order to make the drawing, we're just going to add a couple of sections through the geometry in 3D so we can kind of see what we're doing, and kind of use that to show how the form of our void material changes across the length of it. So what I want to do first is I'm actually going to go in here and so I'll turn my other line weight off, so I just have the silhouettes, and I'm going to go in here and add a surface for each of the solid areas, so I can kind of keep track of where I have my solid and where I have my void. I'll select these outlines and use the command planar surface, which is also this one. So we'll go planar surface. The other way you can do this, of course, would be to draw a plane, just a three-point rectangular plane, and then use your curves to trim it. Select all those curves, type trim, because like if you don't have closed outlines, you might run into problems. Like this surface didn't trim properly. Sometimes that will okay. That's why it hasn't trimmed properly. Delete that surface and fix this curve. Just delete that extra control point. Okay. So like this is a good example of we don't really have a closed outline. So instead we'll just make a surface and trim it with those lines. There you go, so that's our surface. So you can also go type in the command plane, use 3-point or vertical. Okay. And once we're done with this, we're going to actually use another set of planes to describe where our sections will be cut. I'm going to move this guy down. It's closer to being in the right spot. Okay. So that's where we'll start. And what I want to do next is make those section planes I was talking about. I'm going to select everything and use the command cut plane. So we can just do a regular cut plane because we're in, the planes get drawn basically depending on the viewport you're in. So we're in top view right now, which means we just draw a straight line. I'm holding shift from one of the ends, and the command generates a plane all the way through your selection along that line you draw. So once I've drawn one plane that's going all the way through like that, then I want to copy it across the length of my object with a kind of even spacing. So I'll just use the command array. So I'll do 6 in the X direction, 6, enter. And then in the Y direction, I'll leave it to 1. So just press enter, X, leave it to 1, press enter. And I need to click somewhere as a start point because I know my object is 10 inches long. If I choose 2 inches as my spacing and press enter and then just click, it should make a even spacing along the length of the volume, and then press enter again to place the planes. Obviously we don't need these ones on the end because we already have those drawn from our elevations, so I'm just going to delete those ones. What we need to do is kind of roughly draw where we think our object is solid and where we think our object is void, kind of following these planes. So I'm going to turn the other layer back on. That layer where we drew the kind of sand cast silhouette will also be useful. Just as a reference point, so we kind of know where to draw the line that connects these two sides. I'm going to start with drawing on this plane. What I need to do is, I know my object is solid here, I know my object is solid there, and I know that I kind of have a sand cast surface coming down to where these two lines are. And likewise here, I know it's solid in those two places, and I have that kind of profile of where my sand cast goes up to in between. What I'm going to do is select the plane, select those curves that I'm intersecting, and I'm also going to select all the surfaces I'm intersecting. And I'm going to use the command intersect. And you can see what it's showing me is a bunch of lines and points. It's showing me, for example, exactly where this line intersects the drawing plane that we're trying to make a section on. Now I could use the command line draw from point to point. Okay, and then where the plane intersects the surface, we have a line, like that. So I know that I need to kind of try and connect those lines. I'm just going to close this really quick. Okay. Basically, I'm going to use the same command as before, sketch, and I'm going to try and rough out a line that connects those two and intersects this edge in between where we know that kind of profile line goes. So the way that I would draw this is, let me hide these for now. Just use the command hide to hide stuff. I need to be able to draw on this plane, and I need to be able to kind of avoid like snapping to other random objects in my scene while I'm drawing that line. So first of all, in order to draw on this plane, I need to set my what's called a C plane or a construction plane to this surface. So I'll use the command C plane, And inside the options here, I'm going to select the option for object. I should already have my plane selected. If I don't, it'll ask you what object you want to set it to. And you can see the XY axis has just been reset to my object, to that plane. And so now when I draw a freeform, it should pretty much draw automatically on this plane. The other thing we have to worry about now is that as we draw, we're not snapping to things that we don't want to snap to. So again, I'm going to use the command sketch. Now we have two options here. We can, under the OSNAP options down at the bottom, we can just hit disable. So now OSNAP is off. I'm not snapping to anything. But you can also toggle disable by holding Alt on your keyboard. So if you look down there, you can see when I'm holding Alt, the OSNAP turns off, which will allow me to start my point somewhere. So I'm just going to click, then I'm holding Alt. Now I'm not snapping to anything that's behind or in front of my line. And I'm just going to kind of make up a scraggly line to follow. And then when I get close to the end point, I'll let go of Alt. I'm snapping to the end point, and it'll just click, left click. And there we go, there's my line. It's on my plane. And it's connecting the two endpoints of the section. And if I just select those straight lines, I'm just going to use the command join, and I should get a closed curve. Because what we want to do at the end is actually, again, make surfaces out of this. That'll make our lives a lot easier when we're doing the sections. I'll delete that extra line. So now I'm going to go down and do the one below. I'm going to draw a line connecting the silhouettes. Also draw a line at the bottom, connecting the two sides. So just like before, I want to connect those two edges. And I want to intersect this line at some point. That line where we see a interior sand cast surface. So again, I've already set the C-plane to this plane. So I don't need to redo that. I'm just going to do the same process. I'll use the command sketch. I'm going to snap to the start point, and then immediately hold Alt on the keyboard. So click, hold Alt. Now I'm drawing on this plane. Doesn't have to be perfect or precise, just maybe try and mimic what you've done on the elevations. And then I'll click to snap to the other end. Delete that line. Oops, not the plane. Join them. And we should get a closed curve. Okay, and then we can use these two outlines. The command trim. Click on my drawing plane. And so now we have a kind of sectional representation of the plaster, of the solid of the cast. Let me do one more, just so that this process is really clear. So now I'm going to move on to drawing on this plane. You can see that my C-plane is still adhering to the same location. So it doesn't reset just because we delete that surface or anything like that. So in order to move on to the next set of outlines, I need to reset my C-plane, use the command C-plane, and the option for object. And then my C-plane's moved. Again, I'm going to select the surface, the planes, and those intersection curves. Don't need that line. Use the command intersect. There we go. Doing all that. All right. Now if I refer back to my images here, just to give me a point of reference of what's going on. So we're looking in here. So again, we're basically just drawing from one side across to the other on the top and the bottom. We haven't gotten into this area yet. So what I'm going to do is the same process as before. I'm going to draw a straight line from this intersection point to that one. And just like before, I'm trying to connect from this edge, that edge. I'll use the command sketch, snap to the end point of that line, then hold Alt, and start drawing my line. Oops. Join those lines. Okay, and same on the bottom. So I'm actually going to pause right now and finish doing this so you guys don't get bored watching me repeat the step over and over. And then I'll be back when I've drawn all those lines and made all the sections. Okay, so now I've drawn all the sections I need. So I have this kind of object. If I put it in ghosted, you can see a little better. Ghosted, okay. So basically what we want to do now is just kind of pull out these surfaces from all the lines that are in there that are kind of muddying things up. Redo that. And make a kind of inversion of this. So once again, the drawing is to draw the void, basically, to draw the areas where there's material that's kind of subtracting from our plaster cast. So what we need to do is just select all the surfaces and not the lines. I'll use the command select surface, SELSRF, select surface. And I'll deselect that stuff I'll get to later. All right, and then make a copy. Okay. So now, I should also make a box really quick as a reference point. My 3x5x10 box. I'll copy that as well. And then I also need to copy the sections, the planes that I drew the sections on. I'll copy that. Okay. Oops. So if I wanted to duplicate all the edges of this box without actually, because I only need the kind of wireframe of the box, not the actual box as a surface, you can use the command dupe border. Oh, I guess not. I can also use the command silhouette to do it. There we go. And then I'll just group those lines to keep them organized. And I can delete the volume. I have a kind of representation of the bounding geometry. Okay, and then we're going to go one by one. Copy those to the end. Now we're going to go one by one, and we're going to do this kind of inversion thing. So with each surface, what we want to do is change what we're seeing from the solid to the void. So I'm just going to use these planes again. I'll just copy them to each section real quick. Okay, and then we're going to subtract from that plane. First of all, I need to cut this. So because my cast is shorter, I need to cut the top off so we don't get a messy result. Again, I can use cut plane for that. I'll select all my planes, 3-point, snap to where I want to cut it, and then just draw 3 points in space, holding shift. Trim all the tops off. Delete the cut plane. All right. So now what I'm trying to do here is just subtract these surfaces from this surface. Simple. So what I'll do is I'll type in the command split, or I'm sorry, type in the command trim. The cutting objects, that'll be these ones. Press enter. and then I'll click on those surfaces. And then I'm left with a kind of voided shape, just like that. And I'm actually gonna, oops, draw a quick line and trim the top off as well. Now, if that's a little confusing, I'll do it again right here. But maybe it's a little bit easier if you do it a slightly different way, which would be to turn these surfaces back into outlines. So I could, again, use the command silhouette or the command dupe border, duplicate border. And now I have those lines as outlines. I could delete the surfaces and just trim away the internal stuff. All right, press enter, delete the outlines. So actually I'm going to do that for all of these, a little bit more easy to understand. Dupe border, and select last. Oops, no, not select last, select previous. So select the surfaces that we just made borders from and delete them. Okay, let me hide this one as I go. So with each one, select the outlines and trim them away. Delete when you're done. All right, and there we go. Go ahead and hide these ones. So these surfaces now are going to give us a pretty clear representation of the kind of void space. Now we could do the same for the faces of the geometry. I think it makes sense probably only to do it for the two long faces, not the top. Because what we're going to do is bring these lines into Illustrator and make them semi-transparent. We can kind of read that as a volume based on the overlaps. So I am going to do the same for these guys. I'll make a plane, 3-point, base to the top. And trim that surface. Okay. Do the same over here. Plane, 3-point. And there we go. Okay. So the next thing we got to do is turn this into a line drawing. So now that we have a kind of, move this up a little bit. Okay. Now that we have a kind of relatively good representation of the voids as these kind of sections, we need to make a drawing from it. So with this technique, I think it makes the most sense probably to kind of use kind of a pretty steep angle. In other words, not like a kind of angle where everything's, where the long direction is spread out, but we're looking at it pretty foreshortened because that's going to help us see when we go through and make these when we go through and kind of like hatch these shapes, that's going to help us understand that, like where they're overlapping, where there's kind of a solid. So let's do it from this side. This is maybe a little more interesting. Put it in ghosted to get a sense of what that'll look like. Do that. So now I'm also going to save my view. Always save your view before you make a drawing like this, in case you need to update, change things. Then I'll select all my geometry and use the command make 2D. So what I want to do is I definitely want to have the option hidden lines turned on so that we can see those shapes that are behind other shapes. And I also want to have the option maintain source layers on just so I can keep my line weights a little more organized. Go ahead and click OK. Then I'll switch over to top view, and there's my drawing. Color of that layer real quick. Okay, and what I would do now, so you can see already that it's pretty confusing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go one by one and do a make 2D of each layer. So this is pretty clean for the lines. What I'm going to do is do each layer at a time so that I can clearly kind of shade them. So go back to my other viewport, make sure I'm in the right angle, and then I'm going to make 2D each layer. And what I could do is make 2D the box at the same time, just as a point of registration, so I can line everything up. Make 2D, okay. The first layer. Is that everything on that layer? Okay, and then I'll do the same for the two sides, the long sides. Okay, it's pretty clean. I'm gonna go in here and just delete these lines because they're gonna be a nuisance later. These little ones that we don't really need. Okay. All right, and then I would take all this stuff and export to Illustrator. I'll go File, Export Selected. Change Save As Type to Illustrator. Call this my inverted axon. Again, I want to scale it. I might even go a little smaller. 1/4 inch equals an inch. Okay. And then open that up in Illustrator. Zoom way out, there's all my stuff, it's way out of there. I can hit Control All, and move it. So that's kind of interesting. So you might run into this problem. It's basically too large for, it's like beyond where we can see or where we're allowed to work. Oops. So I could select it, go transform, scale 50%. Huh? That doesn't work. Guess you have to scale it manually. And then drag it back into where it needs to be. Okay. All right, now first thing I'm going to do is hit Control A, you can select all. Just make all my lines black so I can actually see them. Up in the color panel, just hit black for the stroke. Okay, and then I'm going to try and maybe compose this drawing a little bit. So let's see here. I could, under my hidden lines, take that line right down a little bit, make the dash slightly smaller, 0.03. Make those a little bit lighter. And then over here, I'm going to make some live paint groups. So I need to kind of fill this in so that I have, you know, a kind of hatched or pochade representation of these shapes. I'll select the whole thing. I want to keep that box again to use as kind of registration point. Now I'll go over here to the shape builder tool, click and hold, and you can get to something called the live paint bucket. You can also hit K on the keyboard, that's the short hotkey. And then what I want to do is set my fill, so not my stroke, I'm going to set my fill to black, and then I want to set my stroke to nothing, which is that little white square with the red line through it. And then I'll click inside those spaces. And I'll go back to the selection tool. So now you can see I've filled those spaces, but I also am still seeing the rest of this line. Now, when you live paint something, it becomes one object. So like before, these are all separate lines. Because I selected everything before I live painted, this is one object now. And then I can select it, go back again to my color panel, and under stroke, just set it to nothing. There we go. So what's happening now is all that information is still there, but and you'll see it. Well, you can't really see it because my layer's color is white. If you want to change a layer color, by the way, this is kind of a random piece of information, but in layers, just double click on the layer. That's the name of my layer. First of all, I could make this easier for myself. I'll just change it to heavy, and under color, I'll change it to something I can actually see. That color only affects what you see when you select it, right? Before it was white, so I couldn't see it at all. It was blending into the background. So now I want to move it into position on top of my, and I'm thinking I'm going to make a new layer. I'll make a new layer, put this on there, and I want these to be underneath all the line work. I'm going to move that into position. In order to move things precisely, I can hit Control or hold Control on the keyboard. You can see my cursor change, and now I can like snap onto anchor points and things like that. And you can see it'll allow me to snap into like other anchor points so I can line stuff up better. And the last thing I would do is select that layer. And up here under opacity, I'm going to change it to like 50%. Now it's semi-transparent. And I'm going to do each of these the same exact way. So I'm just going to do them really quick. K on the keyboard. I'm hitting Shift X to toggle the black from stroke to fill. Okay. And then just turning off the stroke weight, stroke color. All right. Okay. And then I could actually select them all at once and go 50% under opacity. All right. And then I'll move them into place one at a time. Oh, I also want to, at this point, put them on the other layer that I made. So in order to move things between layers, you probably noticed you just drag that little, when you select an object, it'll highlight in the layers panel what layer it's on. You just drag that little shape to whatever layer you want it to be. These all over. And so you can see what kind of starts to happen is this layering effect as we're assembling each of the sections on top of each other. And we get this kind of somewhat loose representation of how the void moves through the volume. And last thing I'm going to do here, did I get all these? Oops, did not get all these. All right. That one needs to be on this layer. That one does. All right, and I am going to do a little more work on these lines. So the the outside volume can also be a dashed line, right? We don't need to represent that in a super heavy way. So I'll drag it onto the layer of my dashed lines. Also, with all those lines selected, in order to change the way they appear, I'm going to use the eyedropper tool. You can also hit I on the keyboard and just click on a line that has the appearance that I want those lines to have. And just like that, they'll kind of pick up that appearance. And I'm also going to do the same for these sections. We're trying to de-emphasize. Oops. I think that should be solid. We're trying to kind of de-emphasize areas where it's ghosted again. Areas where these things are not overlapping, where we just have a. Oops, that's the wrong one. Right, something like that. Okay, that should be open. Okay, and then I'm also going to go through and take all the section lines and make them solid. And for those ones that are hidden behind others, I could just turn up the line weights. They're still showing up heavier. That is way too much. Okay. This should help our shapes kind of read a little bit better. This line is not right. Okay. Oh, it was actually. Okay, there you go. So that's how you compose that drawing. And I want to show you one other kind of technique for doing this. So if you have a geometry that's much more simple, for example, if you were doing water balloons or wax or something like that, delete some of these lines, they shouldn't be here. The other approach you can take is just to model what those voids would be. So with the wax, you could try and model, let's say you're carving kind of simple shapes. With the water balloons, you can obviously use spheres. I just did a quick kind of replication of modeling with a sphere to show where like those water balloons would have gone. I'm going to turn that into a similar kind of drawing. So rather than showing just sections of what our void is, I'll show the actual shapes of the void. Try to show them three-dimensionally. So I'm going to model a box here. And with this one, it'll be kind of important to show like how everything intersects. So I'm going to select all these spheres. And before I do a make 2D, I'm going to select all the spheres and the box and use the command intersect. And as you can see, that'll make lines where all these things are kind of touching each other. Now again, I would choose a kind of orientation for this. Axon drawing. Let's say something like that. Call that Axon 2. Right, and then do a make 2D. All right, so there's that drawing. And again, I'm going to go through and do a make 2D of each individual here. These grouped. Oops. I can shade them independently. Be faster. Did that one. Okay. So delete the hidden lines really quick. All right. So just like before, I'll export this to an Illustrator file. File, export selected. Where did Axon 2? I guess, wait, okay. Maybe I have this backwards. 1 inch should be 0.25. Open that file up. Oh yeah, I had it backwards. All right. So, and I'm just going to go through the same process here with this drawing. This actually is a little small, I think. Right click, transform, scale 200%. Okay. All right. Let's just move all these to a new layer right away. Layer at the bottom. And also make all the stroke weights disappear right away. Okay. And then if you hit Control Y, you can see like the vectors without an appearance applied, like a stroke weight or a fill. I'll hit the paint bucket tool and fill the, oh, what is happening? Control Y, uh-oh. So if you fill too much stuff, that's okay, just go back. Oops. The color panel, change your paintbrush to void. There you go. There's one. I keep using this, you shouldn't use this, use the color panel. Right. K to black, fill in the shape. Control Y. Control Y, K. Set my paintbrush to black, fill in the shape. Control Y. Okay. And just like before, we'll select all of them at once. Actually, in this particular instance, what I'm going to do, actually, you know what? I did this wrong. I should have done this differently. I go all the way back real quick. Okay. In this case, I actually don't want to select the whole shape. Really wasn't thinking. So I don't want to select all the, like the outline of the box and the shape. Because what I want to do is fill this with a gradient. So rather than, when I go to hit the live paint tool, rather than set my color to black, I'm going to set it to a gradient. I'm going to open the gradient panel, which is under Window, Gradient. There it is. I could select that as my fill, and then click on that shape. I'm also going to set it to radial. And then, oops, and kind of do something like that. All right, just so it looks like a sphere. All right, so the whole point of me going back is that this doesn't work. In other words, if I were to select a bunch of lines, like applying a gradient with the live paint tool, it doesn't work if there are lines bisecting the shape you're trying to fill. For example, it would just put two separate gradients. So we need to make sure, if we're going to use this method of like shading, just to select the lines of the individual shapes. That's my bad. Okay. Done. All right. So now again, I can just select everything, turn off the stroke, go. And then when I go to line this up, I can also select everything. Actually, a tough one. Well, we already have the outlines of our shapes, so we can just move the individual shapes. Don't need to worry too much. But before we do that, I'm going to set them all to 50% opacity. We can see through them. All right. Again, you can use the arrow keys to move things in a smaller way, but it's probably best to position it. One. So what happened here is I can't select that object anymore because it's behind all the other shaded things. So all I got to do is change, because they're all in the same layer, that's pretty easy to fix. I just select those three spheres, right click, go to arrange, and hit send to back. The things in the same layer don't necessarily appear in the same way. Like everything in the same layer still has an order, but because they're on the same layer, we have to tell Illustrator what that order should be. So we just have to use the arrange tool. Okay. And then once again, I'm going to make this less prominent, the box, the outside box. Put that all in one layer. Down the line weight, turn down the dash line. Okay. Everything, right? Go on down here. Okay. And then with the rest of these, I'm going to try and separate what are the intersection lines. I'll just kind of try to pull those out. Those lines that we made by using that command intersect. Oops. Not really sure what that is. Ah, that's the top. Are there two lines here? Ah, I see. I'm just going to delete that one. This probably should have been done in Rhino before I left, before I exported. Would have made my life a lot easier. Okay. Oh. All right, great. So let's put all this onto one layer. Use one of our existing ones. Delete the rest of these. All right. And again, make those all one, and we'll make these lighter. There we go. So that's one way to represent your shapes if they have a different kind of geometry like that. All right, so that should do it for this tutorial. In the next one, I'll cover how to make the other axon. And then there will be one more about the last set of photographs.